Hello boys and girls, and welcome to the first bedtime story of the week. I hope you've had a really good day, and I hope that you've made a super start to celebrating all things books and all things reading for this World Book Day celebration. Are you ready to come with me on a journey tonight? Are you sitting comfortably? Are you lying down in bed comfortably? Boys and girls, let me tell you the story, set many, many years ago, of a young girl who attended this school. Her name was Cinderella. A long, long time ago, here in Carrickfergus, there lived a poor servant girl. She was a little girl, just like many of you are, and she enjoyed similar activities that you lot enjoy today. She came here to our school, and she loved learning. Her favourite activity was reading, and she was a word millionaire and accelerated reader. Who knows, in your classroom, she may even have sat in the seat that you now sit on when she was a pupil here. She loved playing cross the Red Sea out in the playground with her friends, and she especially loved getting into the school field in the summer term. The school was pretty similar back then, but the adventure playground didn't exist. At nights and during the weekend, the young girl's life was a real misery, because at home she was given the most tiresome and tedious chores. Scrubbing floors, washing clothes, dusting shelves, and cooking meals for her whole family all the time. Every day when she got back from school, and also on Saturdays and Sundays, she was made to work from dawn right through until dusk without a single penny in return for her long-suffering hardship. It was the most terrible injustice. You see, her mother had moved away when she was young, and her father had soon remarried. But his new wife was simply a horrible, wretched woman. And she had, from a previous marriage, two equally wretched daughters of her own. They would tease the poor girl dreadfully each day, and one Saturday, while she swept the cinders from the fire, they taunted her and chanted, "Cinders, cinders, sweep, 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 in those rags in which you sleep. From this day your name will be Cinderella, hee hee hee." It wasn't very nice, was it? No, it was not. And sure enough, from that day forward, the servant girl's real name was actually forgotten. And she became known to all those here in this school as Cinderella. She was a meek and mild-natured young lady. Despite years of torment from her wicked stepmother and her beastly stepsisters, she did not once raise her voice to them or try to avenge them. Nor did she wish them ill. She simply continued with her duties in the hope that one day, when she was a little older perhaps, that she would escape, that she would move away, and that she would live the wonderful life of which she had often dreamed. One Saturday morning, as she worked tirelessly on her chores, there came a knock to the front door. Cinderella opened it. In front of her stood a small man dressed in royal regalia, carrying an important-looking scroll. Behind him stood two armoured knights, flying flags embossed with the king's arms. Cinderella was a little taken aback by this visit, because it looked to be on behalf of the king. You see, back in those days, the king and queen of Carrickfergus, well, they lived in the castle. All right? Well, anyway, where was I? The little man unrolled the scroll and began to read aloud. "It is my duty to announce," he said formally, "that His Majesty the King of Carrickfergus sends forth an invitation to all the young ladies of this fine town to attend the royal ball at the castle." Hearing this, the stepsisters ran to the door and pushed Cinderella aside. "Oh, goody!" they cried, clapping their hands with delight. The little man continued. "The king's son and heir to the throne, Prince Carlos of Carrickfergus, seeks a princess. And he would like to meet each lady of Carrickfergus and the surrounding areas in the hope of finding true love. The castle doors will open at 8 p.m. next Saturday for the greatest ball the town has ever seen." The little man then turned, mounted his horse, and galloped off, followed closely by the two knights. The stepsisters closed the door, and unable to contain their excitement, let out an almighty shriek. "Oh, I'm getting married to a prince," wailed Josephine. "Not a chance, love, not a chance. He'll never look at you when sure he could have a gorgeous wife like me," Josephina exclaimed. The stepmother entered. "What is the meaning of all this nonsense?" she cried. "Oh, Mama, you'll never believe it. We've just been invited to the royal ball, and I feel sure that one of us will be picked to be a new princess," roared Josephine. "Of course she will," replied the stepmother, breaking into a hideous smile. "What prince would not want to marry one of my wee precious munchkins?" Cinderella watched on, desperately trying to avoid a fit of the giggles, for she knew, as it was plain for all to see, that any prince would rather have lived a life of solitude than marry either of these wretched, selfless brutes. The stepmother turned to Cinderella. "Prepare the gowns for my beautiful daughters," she hollered. Cinderella nodded. "Of course, ma'am." You have to know at this point that Cinderella longed more than anything to go to that ball. But she daren't ask her wicked stepmother, for she already knew the answer, and she didn't want to hear it. So she simply busied herself for the following days with her chores and, of course, preparing her stepsister's gowns for the ball. The evening of the royal ball arrived. A splendid horse-drawn carriage pulled up to the front door, and the stepsisters, adorned in their painstakingly hand-stitched gowns, promptly climbed aboard. Cinderella looked on with great sadness as the carriage set off down the marine highway towards the castle. She sighed deeply. "If only I had one wish," she said to herself, "I would attend the royal ball, and for just one night I might be spared of my horrible duties." Suddenly, there was a crash of light and a flash. A tiny fairy appeared in front of Cinderella, hovering like a hummingbird at Cinderella's eye level and clasping a tiny wand. "And you shall," said the fairy. "Shall what?" Cinderella replied, looking confused and a little worried. "You shall have your wish, for I am your fairy godmother. Oh, how you have suffered in silence all these years. You are a kind soul, dear girl, a mild and gracious young lady, and you shall go to the ball. Your wish, my dearest Cinderella, is my command." Cinderella beamed with excitement. "Oh my!" she exclaimed with glee. Then she stopped, and a frown came upon her face. "But I'm not prepared, fairy godmother. My clothes are threadbare, and my shoes are tattered. I cannot possibly attend the castle ball like this." "Worry not, Cinderella," said the fairy godmother with a smile. "For all I need to grant your wish is a pumpkin, a rat, 2 mice, and 4 grasshoppers." Cinderella looked mystified. "Hurry along then, dear," she said. So Cinderella did what she was told. First, Cinderella went to the spar up at Fortfield and returned with a large, ripe pumpkin. The fairy godmother tapped it once with her wand, and in an instant it transformed into a majestic golden carriage. Then she went to a trap that was set in the coal shed, and she returned with a rat. "Excellent, dear," said the fairy godmother. "Now, if you wouldn't mind just placing it in the coachman's seat for me." Cinderella obliged. Another swish of the wand, and this time a resplendent coachman appeared. The 2 mice, which Cinderella found in the kitchen, were turned into 2 smartly attired footmen, and the 4 grasshoppers into 4 magnificent white horses. Wowee, imagine that happening. "And now," said the fairy godmother, "for my final touch." She tapped Cinderella's shoulder with her wand. A spark flew up, and Cinderella thought for a second that she'd been struck by lightning. The ragged clothes in which she stood a moment earlier were replaced with a picture of complete elegance. Cinderella in a magical, sparkling ball gown, fit for a princess, and upon her feet the finest pair of shimmering glass slippers that your eyes could behold. "Sensational!" exclaimed the fairy godmother. "Now, listen very carefully," she said seriously. "As the clock strikes midnight, this magic spell will be broken, and your clothes will return to rags. The carriage will return to a pumpkin, and the coachman back to mice." "I understand," said Cinderella, hugging the fairy godmother tightly. "And a thousand thank yous for your wonderful kindness." Cinderella stepped into the carriage. Then, with a swoosh of the coachman's reins, the horse-drawn golden carriage departed down the marine highway as well, towards the castle for the royal ball. A trumpet sounded as the golden carriage drew up at the palace gates. Cinderella received a royal welcome. Lords bowed down, ladies curtsied, and many heads turned as she entered the ballroom, including that of Prince Andrew, that of Prince Carlos, who was immediately struck by Cinderella's elegance and the warmth of her smile. I'm getting all confused because I'm thinking about that trumpet call, which was a bit ridiculous. Maybe you could try a better trumpet call at home, could you? Let me try it again. And many heads turned as she entered the ballroom, including that of Prince Carlos, who was immediately struck by Cinderella's elegance and the warmth of her smile. The prince approached. "My lady," he said, bowing his head slowly and offering his hand, "would you be so kind as to give me my first dance?" "I would be delighted," said Cinderella. She could feel her cheeks beginning to blush as she accompanied the prince to the dance floor. The orchestra began to play. Every eye in the ballroom was upon them, including those of the stepsisters. But such was her transformation, they simply didn't even recognise Cinderella. Instead, they stared in envy, longing to take her place before the prince. "Who does she think she is?" cursed Josephine. "I don't know who she thinks she is, love, but she's got a face on her like a half-chewed chip, I tell you that much. She not spotted us? Has he not spotted us? What's wrong with him anyway? Can he not see?" From that moment forth, the prince only had eyes for Cinderella. The two of them spent the whole evening dancing and greatly enjoying each other's company. Many hours drifted by. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Suddenly, Cinderella looked up at the clock. It was 11:59 p.m. and she only had 1 minute before the magic spell was broken. I need to go," she said to the prince. Without delay, she darted out of the room, past the guards and through the castle. But as she reached the drawbridge, she lost one of her glass slippers, and in her haste to get away, she just left it behind her. Alas, the clock on the town hall struck midnight. Cinderella found no coach outside the castle. Instead, there was a pumpkin with a £1 sticker on it from Fort Fieldspar. Even the rat, mice and grasshoppers were nowhere to be seen. And now, clad in her original rags, Cinderella had no choice but to run home alone in the darkness of the night. A few days passed. Cinderella returned to her daily chores, and her stepsisters continued their relentless beastliness towards her. Everything, unfortunately, was back to normal. The evening of the royal ball began to blur and fade in Cinderella's mind like a magical dream. Had the pumpkin really turned into a golden carriage? And the rat into a coachman? Had she really danced all night with the prince, as her stepsisters watched in envy? She was beginning to doubt it all. Suddenly came a rap upon the door. Another one. Cinderella opened it up, just like the last time, and in front of her stood the same round little man that had announced the royal ball, and the same two knights behind him as before. "I present," he said triumphantly, "His Majesty Prince Carlos." A trumpet sounded. You can do the trumpet at home if you wish. Maybe I'll get a trumpet for my next story. And the armoured knights. Sorry, I'll try it again. A trumpet sounded, and the armoured knights parted to reveal the prince, holding a sparkling glass slipper. and the very same slipper that had escaped Cinderella's foot as she fled the castle a few nights earlier. Cinderella's eyes widened. It really did happen, she thought to herself. She locked eyes with the prince and held his gaze for a moment. Not for long, but enough time for him to know the lady with whom he had danced with that magical night was standing right before him. All of a sudden came the heavy stomping of feet, and the stepsisters came rushing to the door. barging Cinderella aside so hard she nearly fell out into the front garden. The little man continued, "His Majesty is visiting every home in Carrickfergus to find the rightful owner of this glass slipper. The foot that fits this shoe belongs to the lady that he will ask to marry." The sisters yelped with excitement. "Oh, Josephina, our time has come, love. Get our dainty wee feet right into those slippers now." Now, at this point, the prince already knew that the sisters' feet would not fit into the shoe. But he did not have the heart to tell them. So, for the following 10 minutes, a quite ridiculous pantomime took place as the sisters, in turn, tried to squeeze their size 10 or size 11 maybe feet into the dainty slipper. Josephine's foot was so wide that it barely made it halfway in, and to avoid the slipper shattering under the pressure being exerted upon it, the little man was forced to intervene. I don't believe that is your slipper. I don't believe it belongs to you," he said in an almost worried voice. Josephina had more luck. She eventually managed to compress her foot into the slipper, only for the sides of her foot to spill out over the edges like Belfast Lock coming over that wall on a rough day. That would have been a bit of a pantomime, wouldn't it? Then came the turn of Cinderella. The sisters scoffed in unison at the mere thought of Cinderella in her threadbare rags trying on such an elegant shoe. No, you may as well forget about her, love, because she wasn't even at the royal ball. What's the point trying it on her? Josephina advised the prince. The prince stepped forward with a knowing look in his eye, knelt down, and carefully slid the glass slipper onto Cinderella's foot. The prince smiled. "A perfect fit," he said. Without a moment's hesitation, Cinderella reached into the pocket of her ragged servant's dress. Then, bending slowly forward, she placed the matching slipper upon her other foot. "A matching pair!" exclaimed the prince with delight. "There is no doubt that you, Cinderella, are my one true love. I have not been able to stop thinking about you. Would you do me the greatest honour in this world of becoming my wife?" Cinderella looked upon her rags and then back up at the prince, and she said, "But I am simply a poor servant girl." "You are," replied the prince, "a princess in my eyes. And it matters not to me of the clothes upon your back, for we share something more valuable than all of the gold in Northern Ireland." He looked longingly into Cinderella's eyes and said, "We share love." Boys and girls, this is where tonight's story ends. I am pleased to say that Cinderella gladly accepted the prince's proposal, and shortly after, they were married in Joymount Church. When their time came, they ruled as king and queen of Carrickfergus. And boys and girls, they lived happily ever after. Good night. Sleep well. Chat to you tomorrow.